So hi everyone, I'm Suzi. I'm an advisor with the Integrity Institute, a membership-driven think tank. Actually, our co-founder, Jeff Allen, is somewhere in the room. Jeff, if you can just raise your hand and let people know you're here. There he is back there. If you're interested in becoming a member of the Integrity Institute, look at our website, or you can just say hi to Jeff back there. We're always looking to have more people part of our community. We have a great panel lined up today with folks from very diverse parts of the nonprofit sector. So before we kick it off, I'd like you all to just give a quick intro about yourselves, your organizations. So kick it off with you.
Great. I'm David Sullivan, and I'm the executive director of the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, which is an industry organization that brings together companies providing all different types of digital products and services, from search and social media to dating and streaming, around a set of best practices for trust and safety online. And I'm delighted to be with you guys tonight.
So I'm Sean Killingsworth. I am the Director of New Member Engagement at Design It For Us and the founder of the Reconnect movement. At Design It For Us, we are a youth-led coalition where we act as ambassadors from Gen Z in the tech policy conversation, how to make social media safer, in the state and federal conversations of legislation, and then at Reconnect movement, I create communities on university campuses for students to socialize without their phones. They host events every other week, and we're on 3 campuses and expanding. And I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Merve Lapus. I'm the Vice President of Education, Outreach, and Engagement for Common Sense Media. Common Sense is a nonprofit organization who's really dedicated to just improving the lives of kids and families by providing trustworthy information, education, and an independent voice when it comes to navigating media and technology. And we do that really in 3 primary ways. We want to provide trusted resources for parents, consumers, and caregivers just to really make educated decisions around the kind of media they want to make available to their kids or the children in their lives. In education, we really want to be able to build up confidence and provide resources for educators to bring the conversation around media literacy, digital literacy, AI literacy, and even civic engagement and its cross paths with media and technology into the classroom space, where technology is such a big part of our instructional tools these days. And then on the policy side is really bridging a coalition of community leaders to bring together how we think about the types of policies that are kid partisan, regardless of what side of the aisle you are. It is about our kids and how we really empower them to leverage technology in their lives today.
As David alluded to at the beginning, the world has changed quite a bit. The tech and social media industry in general has also experienced some significant change over the past few months. And I'd like to hear from each of you how you think the nonprofit organizations can continue to champion safety by design in this environment, but also what unique strengths do nonprofit bring in times of uncertainty. And I'll kick it off with you, Merve.
Sure. I think one of the best parts about being a nonprofit organization in this space especially is you want to be able to connect with your community and a cross-section of the communities. And so a lot of our work, as we talk about families and educators who have really had access to our resources, which they are free for all educators and for any family who wants access to our content, they're all free. And so I think that's one of the things, is being able to provide a high quality resource that really is meeting the need of kids and families, where really there's no entry point, there's no financial entry point. It's really about what's best for them. And it allows for us to develop a number of partnerships that really allow us to be rooted in data. Data that really looks at the impact of what's happening with our kids, data that's really looking at the impact in our classrooms, and then being able to create content that can truly meet those needs in a way where the end goal is not necessarily about using a product, but really engaging in a discussion that really allows for kids to build agency in regards to the way that they think about media and technology. And having that kind of trust from a community is really probably one of the best ways that we can bring these conversations forward, because it really feels like it's coming from a space where there's not kind of a replacement in the goal of what we're trying to do for them.
I'm very thankful to have found this space of nonprofits and of people who are, doing something about this issue. When I founded Reconnect Movement, I was just in high school, experiencing the negative effects of how I was just completely lost, in my fight with my phone. And that's really where it all began. And so starting Reconnect Movement, it was, felt like a lonely road, because all I wanted to talk about was how phones were affecting our social lives and our social environments, and everyone was like, what? You want to add me on Snap? It's just like, it was kind of hard to find that community. And so finding Design It For Us was a huge blessing, being able to just find the coalition, join because I care about this, and then finding opportunities to lobby on Capitol Hill and share my personal story with legislators, and then eventually, becoming a part of the team. So I think these opportunities to build community are extremely important, especially in a space like this where we're all fighting isolation in a lot of ways.
I think, one, it's hard to imagine a more uncertain time than the present. And amidst all of that uncertainty, I think the thing that I would say that's most important about the broad nonprofit community that is maybe a through line between what each of these guys said is the importance of mission-driven organizations at a time like this, at a time when governments and the private sector can be shifting rapidly, being able, there is consistency that mission-driven organizations can provide at a time like this that is just absolutely necessary right now, and it is at a time when all of it is under threat. I've spent my career starting in international humanitarian aid and development and human rights advocacy and multi-stakeholder initiatives and now industry initiatives, and you can see how all of those things are being threatened by some of the things that are going on. I think maybe one thing to highlight is that it's not to try to find a silver lining in a moment like this, but I do think that one thing that is important as we've, as a country, have lurched to the right is thinking about when it comes to safety by design, how can we ensure that whether it's legislative proposals, regulation, collaborative initiatives, voluntary initiatives, how do we make sure that those things can't be misused, or we can guard against misuse of that? And I'm reminded of, for example, there was a bill on health misinformation that was introduced back in, I think, 2021 by Senator Klobuchar that would have made the Secretary of Health and Human Services responsible for defining what health misinformation was and conditioning Section 230 protections against that. And when you think about our current Secretary of Health and Human Services, I'm not sure we would necessarily want that. So I think, mission-driven organizations have an essential role to keep us on balance in this topsy-turvy world.
That's really well said. Especially anything as it relates to Section 230 is always so tricky. And I think when we're in more uncertain times, we understand why we've had to do some things. I love your phrase, losing the fight with my phone. It feels deeply poetic, and I definitely conveys how I feel when I'm endlessly scrolling on something. I have lost that fight. So I think you said it really well. You folks kind of touched on how each of your organizations, do your approach, let me put it this way, all the world's a play, right? And everyone plays a part. And as it relates to the nonprofit ecosystem, you folks each play a different part, right? Merve, you work with schools and on education. You said 90,000 schools, and I can only imagine thousands more of teachers. And then you are really presenting the youth advocacy voice and just the Gen Z voice, which is so needed in this conversation because it's a generation that grew up in this tech native world. And then you from the industry association side. So I'd like to hear from each of you, how you think you complement each other in this ecosystem and the unique strengths that you folks bring to it. So kick it off with you so we can switch it up in order.
Sure. Of course. So I think that it's very important, the conversation of making tech more human and making tech safer. I mean, of course, I love advocating for legislation that will make things safer. COSA, so sad that did not work out. I really cared about that bill, and at Design It For Us, we really care about having these options. Like we outline in our, in our digital, Declaration of Rights, where what do we deserve? What rights do we deserve online? And so I think that having that conversation is one side, and I think there's a lot of people here that are in that space of how can we make this actually safer when we're using it? And I think there's another side that kind of Reconnect is attacking, and other organizations like No So November as well, where it's also making human spaces more human. Because I think those go together very well with, tech isn't going anywhere. A lot of people, when I tell them about what I do, they think, oh, you hate your phone, you hate social media. It's far from it. These are incredible advances in technology. It's just completely brand new. All these advancements are coming on very quickly. So I think that one of the most important things that can pair with using this new technology is finding healthy space away from it. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to create those spaces that don't yet exist, because, we've all lost the fight with our phone before, So I think that it's powerful to create spaces where we don't have to fight with our phone.
Our partnership, we're a partnership of companies, but we are a not-for-profit that's all about identifying, promoting, and using best practices to address trust and safety. And that's really broadly defined. It's about whatever is the type of content or conduct that is inappropriate for a given product or service. We don't say what that is. That's up to the company. But what we realized is that there are all of these different products and services that are out there that are using the same toolbox to try to both proactively anticipate and prevent risks, as well as respond to the risks and potential harms that are going to arise. And that it was perhaps a little bit overdue for companies to come together and say, put a box around this and say, this is what trust and safety is, these are the practices that we're committed to, and this is how we can share that with others, which then can, I think, make for a more informed and equal-sided conversation where so we have 5 overarching commitments that all the companies that we work with make around anticipating and adjusting for these kinds of risks in product development, which is really that proactive safety by design approach. Having governance, what are the rules for the use of a product or service that is clearly communicated and informed by stakeholders and all of those things, enforcing that governance appropriately and improving over time and being transparent with the public. And underneath those 5 commitments, we have about 35 specific examples of best practices. And the idea is that companies can use combinations of those that are appropriate to different types of services, that you're not asking a dating service to be doing the same thing as a search engine. So our aim really is to be practitioner driven and to be descriptive and to say, here's what the practices are, here's what we can elevate as best practices, and then we can use those for a conversation with other folks in civil society, with government, policymakers, regulators. So we want to be that kind of go-between to really help inform and elevate those conversations.
Kind of like educating civil society too, a little bit, right? Is that how you'd?
Well, I think it's more providing a channel. We're not, and in fact, many of the practices that we've included in our best practices are things that are the product of years of advocacy by civil society experts. So for example, among the things that are in our best practices is transparency reporting. It is providing notice to you when your content has been taken down or removed or taken action against. And it's about having some sort of appeals mechanism. And all of those things were items that were people have been advocating for those for years, but in particular, there was a civil society effort called the Santa Clara Principles that set those asks out. So it's a way of having a conversation that's informed by how companies see their job doing trust and safety, which I think then helps make for a more constructive dialogue.
I mean, so in our world where we focus so much in the K-12 space, I think it's just really important to recognize that kids are being given so much access to devices that have more power in them than it took to land on the moon, right? And as we think about kind of the way they use media and technology, the long-term ethical consequences of the way that they use it, they're not necessarily thinking that far ahead. Anyone know where that processing goes, understanding kind of the impacts of your decisions, and like that idea of if I do this in 3 years, this could potentially happen. Like, where does all that kind of processing happen in your brain? Anyone know where that is? Prefrontal cortex. What's the last thing to develop in a developing brain?
Are you trying to say something right now?
Right?
You trying to say something about me right now?
Well, I'm about to get an expert. So, as we're looking at just kind of like adolescence, right? Like most females' brains are going to be developing in like 18, early 20s. Most males between early 20s and mid 20s. I dare to say most politicians in their 60s or 70s, right? And so, as we think about all the power and access to this technology, it means not only do we need to build their skills, but we need to build skills that are transferable. Not just in a classroom, not just when mom or dad or a caregiver says, oh, you can't be doing that because of this, or not just when you're kicking it with your friends and being like, yo, you need to ask permission before you post that picture. Oh, why? Well, because, like we heard earlier, I don't want you to nudify my stuff. I don't want my junk out there. So, we need to normalize these kinds of conversations, but we need to make them transferable. The only way we're going to do that is with coalitions of partners. We hearing from young leaders, like my friend over here, Sean, or David, working directly with industry that is looking to really kind of make amends. I don't say make amends. Thoughtfully, really put into practice opportunities. I think the reality is, in many ways, we don't want to miss the boat that we missed with social media, especially now in the age of AI and how it's supercharging these same issues that we were dealing with before, but now much faster, heightened, right? And very much in this space of opportunity, but also very much in a space of fear. So it's going to take a coalition of partners to do this, and I hope you all want to be involved in that kind of work.
That's great, thank you. I hear you, especially in like trying to normalize those conversations, because it can feel a little bit awkward, like. Oh,
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how many of you all ask permission of your friends when you take a picture and be like, is it okay if I post this? Yeah, awesome. I mean, how many of you guys with children even ask your children? Awesome. Like, I've been asking my kids since 3 years old. You want me to share this? No. Like, where do you want? And giving them agency early to recognize you own that image, you own that voice, and then how do they then replicate that in their own experience, right?
Yeah. And I think like what I really like about what you're saying is that it's so implicit in that how like we are like, it is a very tech dependent world as it is right now. I can only imagine what's gonna be like in 10 years, right? Like what you used to use for social media today versus 10 years ago is extremely different, right? Or like the tech that we used, like, I know I was visiting my friend in Arizona, and like I needed an app to park my phone, to park my car, right? Like I didn't, like it was the only way I could do it.
It's how we eat, it's how we talk, it's how we research.
Yes.
It's everything.
Yeah, so having those conversations early on and just like normalizing it rather than just being so afraid of it, I think is critical. I want to hear more about what kind of metrics, like how do we, it can be a bit like hard to, identify like what good safety by design looks like, right? Like how do you actually measure that, right? For folks especially that are like not directly in our space, like they hear safety by design are like, I have no idea what that is. So how do you quantify what good safety by design principles when they're implemented look like? I'll kick it off with you.
So I think two things there. One is that I was involved with work that we did with the World Economic Forum Global Coalition for Digital Safety, where we did a report about metrics and measurement. And I think the whole point of the report was not to say, here is how you can measure these things, but here is why it is so hard to measure these things. So I think there's two things that I would say. One, something that we highlighted in that report is that when you're talking about safety, that you are combining both subjective feelings, how individuals, sentiment about how people feel about when they're using a product or service, and trying to turn that into quantitative and qualitative insights, as well as more objective data about how you're, identifying risks and the processes and practices that you use. What we have in our partnership, we have the SAFE framework is our methodology for how companies can assess how they're implementing trust and safety practices, and we have a maturity scale that we use where companies identify whether practices are non-existent, ad hoc, repeatable, defined, managed, and optimized. And I think that kind of an approach can help inform other more sort of hard quantitative methods.
Can you repeat the question, please?
It's like, what metrics can we use to evaluate the effectiveness of safety by design?
So I think on this, I would bring it back to what I mentioned before, which is safety by design of what? Safety by design of the technology, or the other kind of flip side that I described earlier, which is the safety by design of our human spaces. So, safety by designing social environments. And so to bring you in on what I mean by that, I'll share a story from a Reconnect event that I hosted at one of the first schools we started at. The event started in about 15 minutes. These two girls who were participating kind of showed up early, and there was like a little bit of a, awkward silence moment going on. It's like a little bit, awkward at the beginning, small talk, Gen Z, oil and water. So I was kind of, pushing through it. It is what it is. And then people showed up. The event started. These two girls were very like kind of social awkward at the beginning, right? And then I'm moderating the event, and we're doing this conversation game where everybody rotates and has conversations. And I just caught my eye. This girl who was so socially awkward right at the very beginning was like laughing, talking with her hands, having the best conversation with this person she was speaking with. And it lit up my soul. But I think what it made me realize was, to see the measure of how this person was able to act in an environment that was full of phones and maybe not so conducive for socializing, and then all of a sudden that same person who seems completely incapable of socializing is put in an environment that's designed for socializing, free from phones and welcoming conversation, that now this person Gen Z gets a bad rap for not being able to talk or being socially awkward, is all of a sudden completely fine and socializing. So I think that I would, kind of flip the script a little bit and say how designing our social environments in a better way can have a similar quantifiable impact in how people can operate. And I've seen that happen with participants in Reconnect.
Yeah, give it up. Totally. I think we really look at this in two different ways. I think one is recognizing there are child development standards that are consistent. And if we're designing platforms, not for kids, but know that they're on them and we're just gonna let them kind of roll through it, there are gonna be addictive behaviors, there are going to be pressures, there are gonna be these patterns that we're putting into the way that these tools are working that's gonna hook our kids and maybe not necessarily really behave in a way that's gonna be supportive of their development. And I think the reality is they know that there's that quick utility of excitement because it allows for them to connect or share or do all the things, but the longer they spend on it, the deeper it goes or the darker it goes. And that's problematic. I think the other thing that we then want to look at, if it's not measured on the child development standards and the needs, is also then looking at we got to recognize that every child, even ourselves, we're coming into technology in a consistent way in how it works, but our contexts, our backgrounds, our values are all a little different. And as we think about, we talk a lot about this with our students, when you identify the values you're growing up with. So one of my big values is like trust, right? And then there's also honesty, and there's a number of values that you might see. These are my top three. We have kids then kind of go through and look at all the tech that they're using and rate the value and how it stays or does not show reflected in that particular tool. So, Instagram, it can be really fun for me. And then there's times where I just don't feel like it's being honest with me. And then if you feel that value is not being shown in that particular tool, resource, or device, then it really makes you have to really think critically, when is it enough? When is it not? When should I not even be on here? Because that value of context is a good way of being able to connect a reality that sometimes it's so easy to miss because it's so easy to get stuck. How many of y'all have doom scrolled before, just kind of got stuck in the brain rot of things? We all do. Just don't do it in the restroom. That's probably the biggest fault that I hear. I'm working on that with my
best
kids.
memes.
I know that's like the most quality memes get sent in the restroom, I feel, but.
Wow. Okay. what strategies, we've talked a little bit about coalitions, what strategies have you found to be most effective when it comes to building like meaningful coalitions in this space? When there's a lot of disagreement sometimes on like some core things and like just defining safety by design, like how we should introduce tech to children. So yeah, I want to hear from each of you. We'll kick it off with, actually no, we kicked it off with you last time. Merve, we'll kick it off with you.
Sure. I mean, I think the number one thing is really like true mission alignment. Like, as we look for partnering in coalitions, and this is even with industry, it's really recognizing that, we can't just provide some resources or tools to try kind of follow the realities of, something happened, how do we help you now cope with it, or address those issues? And there's great prevention that we can provide so that kids can have more agency and think more critically. But the opportunity of designing alongside with industry, who is really driving technology forward, I think it's an excellent opportunity to kind of join in those types of forces. And so I think for us, as we think about the work, is what is the real mission of alignment, and how do we use that as a North Star? And in some ways, as a nonprofit, capacity-wise, is a struggle. So for those of you who can help build out that capacity for us, that's amazing. But it is really challenging to kind of work at that level and at that pace. It can be really challenging with smaller nonprofits that are just trying to do good work but don't necessarily have the product know-how when we've got the content know-how, right?
Well, I think with the two coalitions that I'm a part of, with Reconnect and Design It For Us, it's volunteers for a lot of it, and I'm not sure if that's true of all the organizations here, but with Design It For Us, I work with new member engagement, so I think that definitely having an aligned purpose, but also an aligned action that's being taken. What are we actually doing here when we're convening? And I think that's what I've enjoyed doing at Design It For Us is we've developed all the different work groups focused on tech and design, state and federal lobbying, AI policy, and being able to bring in there's so many passionate people that care about this issue, and I think that a great way to bring those numbers, the strength that we have in numbers of people who care about making a difference, is giving them something they can actually do, so that way they're not sitting in limbo. And I think the same goes for Reconnect, in a little bit of a different way, where the student leaders are volunteering, but at the same time, the participants are getting something different. They're getting value. They're joining something where they're now a part of an environment where all of a sudden it's a little easier to make friends, and all of a sudden conversations seem less awkward. And so I think bringing in, not just talking about like, wow, this is terrible what we're facing, this is what a David and Goliath moment we're at right now, but also bringing in on positive experiences that can actually change someone's perspective of what's possible, and create a future that we're all excited to actually push towards and work together in. So that's what I've found with coalitions is very powerful.
Yeah, totally agree with both of those points. I think, though, that there's also the point about recognizing obstacles and recognizing that, multi-stakeholder collaboration doesn't mean that everybody gets to agree on everything. And understanding that the kind of, sometimes it's the unlikely alliances where we may disagree about, half a dozen things, but we can agree on this one thing, which is where you can make the most change. And that is not always easy. In the context of the work I mentioned before on with the Global Coalition for Digital Safety, in that coalition we have governments, companies, NGOs, international organizations, and in particular, there are a lot of different views about end-to-end encryption across all the organizations that are part of that. So when we were trying to, have a workshop about this report on metrics and measurement and safety, the people are like, so maybe we should talk about an encryption. I was like, no, we're going to put that over here, and we're going to concentrate on the things where we have potential to agree with each other. And I think sometimes you have to be really upfront about that stuff, because if you try to sort of brush it away, it's only going to cause problems down the road.
Yes, especially as it relates to encryption. Okay, as we wrap up, last question for you all, and to end on the theme of hope. what concrete hope or prediction you have about, the future of what safety by design is going to look like in the next, I'm going to say 5 years, just give you 1 year past, current 4 years. Yeah. We'll start it off with you, voice of the youth, kick us off.
I think that, with like you've mentioned, we mentioned on this panel, tech isn't going anywhere. The genie is out of the bottle, and it's only going to get more and more more and more intrusive and more helpful as well, and more present in our lives. And I think some people would hear me say that and think, oh, that's terrible. That's we're heading off the cliff, and that would be discouraging. But to me, I see that as it's going to become all the more apparent each year that goes on that things need to change. And I think that it is inevitable that we're going to realize that we're disconnecting from our humanity. And it's already obvious, but is it obvious enough for everyone to care about it? I mean, everyone that is, everyone in New York City is in this room. This is a special group of people. So I think that it's inevitable that we're going to beat this, and that we're going to make the change necessary, because we're humans. I mean, we're not going to give up our humanity. We're going to find a way through this. So.
I have a really boring answer to this question that I'm really excited about.
As long as it's hopeful. I need hope.
When Rebecca from Thorn mentioned standard setting in the previous panel, my eyes lit up, because I'm all about international standards as a way to drive some coherence around this work. So I think that there is actually potential to use international standards as a way so that we don't have, every country around the world having their own conflicting regulations about how to do safety by design. There's standards that exist for cybersecurity, for AI, for privacy, and we can do standards around the practices of trust and safety, not about the types of content. So I do think that that's something that is achievable, and I think it's a part of a broader strand of let's make technology boring. I think it's Professor Nathan Matthias at Cornell has a whole, I'm going to make trust and safety boring by making it just like pharmaceuticals and other established regulated agencies. And I don't know if we need to go quite that far, but I do think that there's potential for standards that drag some of this down out of this very politicized world in which everyone is fighting about expression and things that are really fundamental, and to systematize the things that can be systematized to raise the bar.
So boring is hope. Yeah. That works. I think a little bit, we're having too much excitement, so I think boring is a good antidote right now. All right, Merve, bring us home.
Yeah, I have a lot of hope, but as I tell the parents and the caregivers and the families I work with, hope is not an actual viable solution, right? So as we think about kind of my hope or the direction that we're going, I think, one, universal standards is incredibly important. It's hard for us to be able to operate if we've got all these contending viewpoints in what we're trying to measure. And so I think there is a need to look at what these universal standards are. And in many ways, we're learning from the international community how to look at this work, because it's happening in Australia, it's happening in the UK, it's happening in Brussels, it's happening everywhere else before it happens here. And then here, it's really state-based, right? So it is incredibly important that we get on the same page. But I think the other aspect of it is recognizing that we all have a stake in it. Even though it's not, our child, it is a child in our community. Even though it may not be, our particular community, what we do, what we develop, what we put out there, I think we need to start really thinking about the whole community approach, again, because we've become very, I don't want to say greedy. No, it's not greedy, but it's been so easy to just kind of think about how it affects me and my needs. And I think we start to lose then kind of the humanity around humanity as a collective and as a community. And so I hope that we really start to kind of put others before ourselves, recognizing that will actually provide us great value because we surround ourselves with greatness and great people.
Wow, that's the hope I needed to end on. Thank you all so much. Can we give our panelists a hand, please?